Morning, Professor.
Good morning, all. Good morning, Lucas. Uh, let's get started in 1 minute, just to see if somebody else will join us. I see that people are joining the classroom. In 1 minute, we get started. Uh,
Daniel, may I just ask you something?
of course.
Have you put a halt into the essays?
Yeah, that's a good question, Cristiano. I received the same question through email. If you remember, guys, I guess 1 or 2 classes ago, I mentioned that when we started to discuss supply chain finance, which is 4 classes. Let me open here the syllabus to show you. But I said that during the classes in which we discuss supply chain finance, we wouldn't have any essay, any reading, mandatory reading. Okay.
Yeah, I
So
remembered.
yeah. My intention to you guys is first, we don't have uh, 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 many options of materials on supply chain finance. Actually, this is a quite new um, topic. We have materials on supply chain management. We have a bunch of materials on finance and financing, but we don't have materials on supply chain finance. Supply chain finance today is much more linked to the practice. Because of that, I preferred not to uh, um, provide materials to you to read and to make essays, and leave this time, these 4 classes, 4 weeks, for you to prepare yourselves to the presentations. Okay, to the presentations. So we're not gonna have any essay regarding supply chain finance. We're gonna have the essays again when we start the presentations. Let me open here the schedule, then I can explain myself better. What I mean, guys, is the following. Look, what I mean is the following. Here we have our course schedule. We are since April 6th discussing supply chain finance. So we started April 6th talking on the basics on the supply chain finance. Today we're going to talk about downstream and upstream supply chain finance strategies. Next week we're going to discuss securitization or factoring, if you will, and we're going to end the topic supply chain finance on May 4th. So this class here, this class here, oops, my laptop is a bit slow. This class here and this class here will not have any essay related to them. Okay, you're free to release any essay. What I'm asking you guys is, during this 1, 2, 3, 4, even more, because we are jumping here 1 week here actually, during this period, focus on your presentations that will take place from May 11th onward. Okay, use this period to prepare your presentation, to read the papers, okay, etc. And one additional comment, important comment here: as soon as we start the presentations, case 1, case 2, case 3, and case 4, then it's gonna be requested for you guys to deliver one essay per week. Which essay is this? The essay related to the case that's being presented. For example, Group one, group one. Group one will present case one, procurement strategy with the team, with the subject, procurement strategy in the global context. All the students that are not in group one shall deliver an essay, with a summary on the case one, and so on. Okay. I'll give you the word in a minute, Gabriel. Uh, for the group that is presenting, in that day, then of course it's not necessary to submit any essay. But for all the other students that are not presenting in that day, it's gonna be requested an essay related to the paper that's being discussed that day. Please, Gabriel.
Are you going to give further instructions on the essays? I know there's a lot of it on e-class as of now, but are we going to have any further instructions as to, well, how long is it supposed to be? Is it supposed to take up the whole class? How dense the presentations should be, and so on?
Well, I couldn't hear your question completely, but I'll try to answer. If I didn't match completely your question, you just let me know. But we have here actually, as I understood, two points regarding the model of presentation of the cases. I don't have a standard model. I want you guys to be creative. Okay, I want you to prepare a PowerPoint to divide the topics among yourselves. Okay, and my intention is to create a. It's not gonna be a one-way presentation. It's not gonna be like you guys presenting and the rest of us listening. My intention is, at least from my part, to provoke you. I mean, or to make questions or to make additional comments. Okay, on the cases, as I am very familiar with all of those cases. So my intention is to interrupt you during the presentations to add some comments to help on something, or to add some additional ideas and concepts. Regarding the essays related to the period in which we're going to have the group presentations, there is no model. It's pretty much like you've done in the first part of the course. Okay, I would like to have one and a half page essay bringing the main insights you guys had on the reading. Okay, preferably using a dissertative model. I wouldn't like to have like bullet points as a simple summary. It's not the case. I'd like to hear you, or to read your interpretation, your understanding on the case, bringing your insights. You don't need to copy and paste anything from the case. I'd like to hear or to read what you got from the case, or your opinion on the case. If you have any similar experience or knowledge on other cases, you can bring to your essay. So it's a very, I would say it's admittedly a freestyle, okay, writing. Not sure if I answered your question, Gabriel, or if you have anything else.
No, you answered it. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions, folks? Is that clear for everybody?
Professor, regarding the group presentations delivery, we are gonna have to deliver on the same day that we have the case, or the previous class. Like, we get the case and read it a day after, I don't know, a week after.
Actually, the cases, Arthur, are already available for you, and my idea is to put as deadline to deliver the essays the day in which the case will be presented. For example, case 1 will be presented May 11th. The idea is that the deadline is May 11th at 11 a.m. Okay, always the deadline is in the beginning of the class related to that case. For example, case 2 will have as deadline May 18th, 11 a.m. I'll be opening Dropbox eventually today or this week to let you let you aware about the date. But this is gonna be the scheme, the process. Okay. I don't know if I answered your question, Arthur.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. I wouldn't like guys to have you concerned about, for example, timing of presentation. Okay, we have one close to 2 hours class. Yeah, my intention is to use. Actually, I will dedicate the entire class, the entire time we have to each group. But eventually, you're gonna speak for, or you're gonna have a presentation for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. No problem. The idea is to us to have, as I said, discussions during the presentation in order to make the thing more attractive to everybody. So one thing that I suggest is you're gonna read the cases. You're gonna see that the cases are very updated, are very up to date, are very linked to the reality. If you guys, I guess this is important, a good suggestion. If you guys bring more examples coming from the internet, coming from your own experience, family experience, professional experience, to make a link with the case, with the problem that the case is bringing, I guess it's gonna be enriching. Okay, you're gonna make your presentation more attractive. Okay, so that's my suggestion. But I wouldn't be concerned if you guys have, 30 minutes presentation. Okay? It's important to have a consistent presentation, bringing all the topics important for that case or for that problem. And as I said, if you have additional insights, always welcome. Okay. Let me see if I have something else. As I said, all the students have, or better, will be requested to deliver an essay on each case, except the group that is presenting that case. Okay, and for the group that is presenting the case, what I'm gonna request is for one person of the group to upload the presentation, the materials that you're gonna use to present the case. If the PowerPoint, you just upload the PowerPoint. If you have any additional materials, I will ask you to upload in the same Dropbox of the summaries, okay, of the essays. So case 1, we're gonna have a Dropbox in which everybody will upload the essays, and the group that is presenting case 1 will just one person upload the material that will be used in the presentation. For example, the PowerPoint. All right. Any additional question, folks? No. I'll be writing these down in the e-class, all this guidance, just to make sure that everybody, I don't have all the students present today. We have 24 students, so I will write down in the e-class a summary on what I've just explained it, just to make sure that everybody is aligned. Okay. All right, guys. If we don't have any additional questions, we have a road to hit. Let me open here the material number 2 on basics of supply chain finance. Okay, downstream and upstream supply chain finance strategy. Just a minute. Let me stop a while. To share the screen. Hold on. Downstream and upstream supply chain finance. I'm releasing to you guys material. Okay, just a minute. Let me make this available for you. Hold on. All right, material is already available for you. The PowerPoint related to this class. If any of you want to follow this class using this material, okay. As always, I will display my screen for you in order to make our life easier. All right. All right. Hold on a minute. I'm getting more experienced in offering classes using Zoom, as we are doing this for more than 1 year. But I guess sometimes I make some mistake that I didn't make in the past. I don't know if I have a reduction in my learning on Zoom, or if I am very tired of teaching at Zoom. I imagine that sometimes you feel the same, right? Missing, in-person contact and in-person classes for us is the same thing. Anyway, let me open here my. At least we have, right? We have Zoom, and it's effective. It's effective actually. We can offer good knowledge using this tool. Let me open here my whiteboard.
Recording in progress.
Recording in progress. Disconnect. All right, folks. There we go. Yes, last week, guys, we discussed the basics on supply chain finance. I brought you actually some very initial concepts on the, I would say, new field of science, this new field of investigation within supply chain management. So supply chain finance, as we saw previously, it is the link between the way we manage supply chains, the way firms interact among each other within supply chain, and the financial side of the business. We've discussed the one example in which one firm finances their customers, its customers, in order to leverage sales, and what's the impact of this strategy, which is a pure supply chain management strategy, what's the impact of this in the balance sheet, which is purely financial. The same thing for companies that offer or that request payment terms to the suppliers. We've mentioned this example and we show how these impact, again, firm's balance sheet. So supply chain finance tools come to supply chain management science, to supply chain management field to help us, to help managers, to help directors, to help practitioners to close this gap between implementing a supply chain management strategy without harming a lot the firm's balance sheet. Okay, this is the objectives of supply chain finance. As I said previously, we saw the concept of supply chain finance. We've discussed a bit the concept of cash-to-cash lead time, what's the impact on firm's balance sheet. And today we're going to discuss two strategies, two supply chain finance strategies related, one to downstream supply chain and other upstream supply chain. Just to refresh the concept here, when I use this term downstream and upstream supply chain, what I mean is the following. We have here one firm, leading firm, okay? Leading firm that I am representing as LF. All the relationships that this firm has upstream, or in other words, all the relationships that this firm have related to sales or distribution, sales and distribution may be named as upstream supply chain. I am dealing upstream supply chain. The same thing. The relations between the firm and the network of suppliers may be named as downstream. Sorry, oops, I made the inversion here. Here we have downstream supply chain. Downstream supply chain. And the relation between the firm and its supplier networks are relations that are given within upstream supply chain. So everything that is behind the firm is upstream. It is at upstream supply chain. Everything that is ahead of the firm is downstream supply chain. I will use two words in Portuguese just to exemplify for the ones that, for example, like fishing or like rivers, like to see, to analyze rivers, natural course of water. When I say downstream, I'm referring to jusante, the upfront part of the river. When I am referring to upstream supply chain, I'm using a word that is similar to montante, rio acima. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing. We imagine that supply chain is the river, and when we want to refer to supply chain upward supply chain, I use the term downstream, and vice versa. Okay, I'm just saying all of these, making these refresh to inform you guys that this firm established strategies to deal downstream and upstream supply chain. Depending on the strategies that this firm established to deal with customers and suppliers, some impact, some type of influence may appear on the balance sheet of the firm, as we saw in our last class. Today, we're going to discuss how firms may keep establishing their strategies downstream and upstream supply chain, using upstream and downstream supply chain management strategies without harming their balance sheet. Or in other words, how we can use banking to help this leading firm to deal with buyers and suppliers mostly, as this is a procurement strategy course. Okay, this is the objective, this is the aim of this class today. So this is it's going to be a very practical class. Okay, there we go. All right, this is our agenda for today. First, we're going to discuss source of funding that a firm have available or at its disposal. Second, we're going to make a brief view on how debit operations appear at the balance sheet. Third, we're going to discuss then the first strategy, aiming to reach downstream supply chain strategies, vendor finance. Same thing, we're going to see a second type of strategy of supply chain finance strategy, aiming to address upstream supply chain strategies. And we're going to finish with risk structures related to these two types of strategies. Okay. Source of funding, guys. What are the two, I would say, the two main sources of funding that a firm have at its disposal? When a firm wants cash, how does a firm get cash? We have two hands raised. I will pass to you, Gabriel, and after that, Mateus.
You can either raise money through debt, so taking out loans, or through equity.
Perfect, Gabriel, perfect. Mateus, go ahead, please.
That's what I was going to say too. Gabriel put it perfectly.
Perfect. And guys, I ask you, in addition, what's the difference related to cost when I raise money through debt and through equity? Regarding cost, what's the difference between both strategies? Gabriel, Mateus, and all the other folks. Go ahead, Gabriel, please.
When you're talking about equity, you share the profits with the person that's investing you, whereas when you're taking on debt, you have to simply pay the person no matter what.
Perfect. That's the concept. So we have here two main strategies to raise money, as Gabriel and Mateus pointed out: debt and equity. And Gabriel was, as some colleagues would say, surgical in defining debt and equity from a cost standpoint. What Gabriel said: equity, when we operate using equity, the shareholder or the investors that are putting money in the company, they are running the profit and the losses related to operation. They are running the risk of getting profit or getting losses. If the firm gets, I don't know, 35% P&L in 1 year, all the shareholders will get 35% addition in addition to what they apported, what they put in the firm. And the same thing is true if we think on losses. If the firm gets 40% loss, the investor will lose 40% of their money. When we talk about raising money using debt, the logic is not that. I mean, the bank offers money to a firm, make a loan to a firm, and what they want is a percentage of interest rate at the end of a certain period, 1 year, 2 years, 1 month, 3 months. Regardless if the firm will generate profit or loss. So this is like flat, fixed, constant cost for the firm. Okay, again, regardless if there is a profit or a loss in the operation. In addition to that, guys, we have, of course, we have other types of source of funding, but I would like to highlight 2 that we're gonna discuss in the next class and in the class after the next, which is sale of assets. When I sell my fixed assets, my PP&E, properties, plant, and investments, I may raise money. I may convert non-current assets into current assets, precisely cash, and raise money using this strategy. We're gonna discuss this in detail, as I said, in the following classes. And we have securitization. How can you guys, or I don't know if any of you guys could help me in explaining what is securitization or factoring? Securitization? No? No problem. Securitization, guys, is the process in which, again, it's going to be discussed next week more precisely, but securitization is the process in which we sell account receivables. How do I generate account receivables? What type of strategy that a firm adopts to generate account receivables? What the type of strategy does a firm adopt to generate cash account receivables? Why does a firm have account receivables? Go ahead, Gabriel, please.
Maybe it's something when you're producing a big item, such as, I don't know, a train, and you're working through tenders, and so the payment will come before, so the product will come before the payment because the customer won't want to pay for something that's unfinished, that isn't delivered yet. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's the sense. In other words, just to add to Gabriel's comment, all the firms that deal with downstream supply chain financing the customers. I mean, if I am if we work in a firm that, given the structure of the market, the structure of the supply chain, is requested to finance the customers, I mean, to provide payment terms to the customers. I will sell you something and I'll give you 90 days, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years payment term. If a firm is in a situation like that, naturally, this firm will increase the account receivables as part of its strategy. Its strategy of getting market share, getting profit through interest rates or through margin, whatever. So we have several firms in several industries, in several supply chains that are requested that, I mean, the supply chain makes it mandatory to the firm to finance its customers. Okay, when we have a situation like that, we have a increase in account receivables. Go ahead, Mateus, please.
And that does not have to be done directly by the company, right? They can do it through a third party, like a financial corporation.
Exactly. This is the topic on vendor and comprador, Mateus. Exactly. Here is the following. Firms may use, as Mateus mentioned, financial partners to finance its customers or to finance its suppliers. The situation that I am describing to you happens downstream supply chain, but also happens upstream supply chain. Or, in other words, when a firm deals with the suppliers. For example, I am a leading buyer and I buy from several suppliers, but those suppliers have bargaining power against me. They have bargaining power against me, whatever, because the product is very specific and I need that specific product from that specific suppliers or any other aspect. So in a situation like that, my suppliers may request payment in advance, upfront payment. Hey, I will manufacture your product, I will deliver in 120 days, in, I don't know, 150 days, but I need 100% cash paid upfront at contract signing. This may happen. And I would say that it happens in some supply chains with reasonable frequency. So in this case, remark, in this case, the buyer needs to make the disbursement very early in the process of hiring the product. So eventually having a cash mismatch. So in these circumstances, instead of talking about account receivables increase, we may say that this firm has a trend of accounts payable increase, which is represented here in this line supplier. Sometimes it is expressed as accounts payables, sometimes as just suppliers. So this is what suppliers owe to the firm. Okay, so we have this situation in both sides of the supply chain, downstream and upstream. And remark, when I finance a customer, or when I finance, because when I make a upfront payment, I am financing my supplier. When I finance my supplier, I have a mismatch in my balance sheet. So I need to fill this gap. What's the immediate strategy, financial strategy to fulfill the gap of big account receivables or big account payables? Debt or equity. So if I am selling invoice product, but the cash related to those sales will just get into my cash, into my pocket within 90 120 1 year, I will have a lower cash. Then I will need debt or equity, basically to pay my bills, to pay the salary of the employees, to pay the infrastructure, rent, energy, etc. Because I'm selling, but I'm not receiving. I'm selling, but I'm not receiving. Remark, if my account receivables, for example, start to raise indefinitely, start to raise at rates, at high rates, at some moment, the banks that finance my operation may say, hey guys, you know, we need to review your credit limit. And then we ask why? Because your account receivable is too high. Why having a high account receivable is a problem for a firm, guys? Why a high level of account receivable is dangerous, or is a problem for a firm? Go ahead, Gabriel, please.
Because that means you're not receiving any like cash for your work. So you can end up with no liquid assets to use in day-to-day operations.
Yeah. That's the sense. That's the sense. I will use. I will add just a few words to your explanation. At the end of the day, guys, account receivables carry within itself credit risk. If I am full of account receivables, means that someone will pay me something in the future. If it is in the current asset, it's going to be within 1 year. If it is in the non-current asset, it is to be paid in more than 1 year. So if I am having account receivables, raising account receivables means that I am increasing my credit exposure. Eventually, those customers may not pay me. So there is eventually I may face, as Gabriel said, a liquidity problem, because I'm not receiving what I was expected to. So when this is very high, the account receivables, short-term account receivables or long-term account receivables are very high, a firm tends to reduce its bankability, its capacity to raise money through banks, because banks they are actually sensitive to these type of risk that are carried by the account receivables, or they will reduce the credit limits, or they will raise the rates. Okay, or third option, they may eventually keep the rates, keep the credit limits, but will request more collaterals. Okay. This is the problem. And remark, when I talk about account receivables or account payables, I'm just talking about issues related to supply chain management. If I decide to provide credit payment term to my clients, this is, of course, if I was a marketing professor, I would say that this is a marketing strategy. If I was I don't know, a supply chain management professor, as I am, I would say that this is a supply chain management strategy. At the end of the day, this is a strategy that the firm uses to catch a customer, to raise profits against the customer, and so on. The same thing when the firm decides to make cash payments. I said in my example that eventually the firm is requested to make the cash upfront payments to suppliers because the bargaining power is on supplier side. But eventually, this may be a strategy coming from the buyer. Actually, Apple, the ones that will present Apple's case, will see that Apple uses this strategy as they are very robust in terms of cash. What they do, they make early commitments with the suppliers, paying very upfront for contracts that will be performed in a period in the future. Because I'll give you the word, Roberto, just 1 minute. Because as soon as Apple puts cash in supplier's pocket, this supplier is just tied to Apple. The supplier is just tied to Apple. So this is a strategy, a supply chain strategy, procurement strategy as well. If I decide to make very frequent upfront payments to my supplier, but I have a consequence in my balance sheet. Go ahead, Roberto, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. I had a technical problem. I wasn't finding the link to Zoom, and I would like to know. I've also sent you an email, desperate about it, but now I found the link. It was hidden on the notices on the class, and I wasn't finding. So I would like to know what has been the content of the class so far. If I lost anything like crucial or something like this.
Sorry, Roberto. I didn't understand well your question. I understood that you got late in the class because of the link, etc. But what's your doubt?
Okay, I would like to know what has been the content of the class so far from today. If the slides presentation, if I've lost any crucial parts.
No. We've just started today. The discussions are around downstream and upstream supply chain finance strategies. The objective of this class today, Roberto, is to discuss how firms may partner with banking, with the banking industry, or with capital market partners in order to finance their suppliers or their customers. Okay, I'm just giving at this moment just a brief introduction.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem at all. Okay, Mateus is making a comment in the chat. ISA, income share agreement. This is a common example of financing in the US. All right, you're right, Mateus. Yeah, exactly. And well, we're gonna discuss these type of strategies applied to Brazil. At the end of the day, what I'm bringing to you at this moment is the main issue. I mean, the main issue when we decide to finance customers or to finance suppliers. Okay, again, very, very common in several industries in Brazil. I am familiar with agribusiness, and in agribusiness, this is mandatory actually. Okay, everybody, I mean, the farmers, the production side of the business are highly financed. They demand at high levels credit. Because of that, all the suppliers, firms that supply the production, for example, chemical industries like Bayer, BASF, and several others, and buyers, the traders, the industries, etc., they need to be prepared to finance the production, to finance the farmers, the co-ops, etc. So specifically in agribusiness, we have a very well-established supply chain finance structure used, in which firms use securitization, use compro finance, vendor finance, real estate funds, and etc. Okay, but this is applicable to other industries. For example, the fuel industry in Brazil, gasoline, diesel, etc., also deploy in a large manner supply chain finance strategies. Okay, so This is the issue, as I said, related to downstream and upstream supply chain management. So now, guys, I would like to, knowing that, I would like to explain you two main strategies to finance customers or to finance suppliers. Okay, the first one is vendor finance. Vendor finance, we can name vendor finance and compro finance in several different forms. Okay, we may simply mention, or we may simply name the act of finance customers or suppliers using a bank or using a fund as portfolio finance, when we finance portfolio, whatever, if this portfolio is upstream the supply chain or downstream the supply chain. We may mention, or we may name this type of structure as trade finance simply, or in Brazil, which is very used, the term, it's not very used abroad, but in Brazil it is very used. We may say that a vendor finance structure or a compro finance structure, a portfolio finance structure, are structured finance facilities. We may refer to this type of structures, which is not or are not direct financing, a firm getting working capital with a bank, or an individual getting money from a bank. We may name these in Brazil as structured finance. Okay, I like most trade finance, vendor finance, compro finance, or better, portfolio finance. But what is portfolio finance? Specifically, what is vendor finance? Why we have vendor finance? Look, generally we have a triad between supplier, customers, and banks. The reasonable is that the supplier raise money in the bank when they need. The reasonable to think is the suppliers do the same, raise money with the banks when they need. This is the reasonable to believe. But if this is the reasonable to believe that the bank will finance supplier, the bank will finance customers, why do we have vendor finance? What is vendor finance? What is vendor finance? Go ahead, Gabriel, please.
I was thinking of something such as, I don't know, potato farmers for companies that make chips. So we're not going to be able to have the same amount of crops every year. And that means that they can, for example, sign an agreement that says, you give me all your crops every year and I'll give you this steady salary. So they finance them in a way. And that's not something you do in banks, because in banks you usually take a loan or something like that. Whereas with the supplier, you can have an agreement about your production that gives you a more valuable and stable income than what you would have at a bank. It's more flexible per se.
Yeah. It may be applied as you mentioned, mostly when you say about agribusiness. Okay, but here I would like to touch in other aspects. I mean, why we have, like, the question is if the customer needs money, they shall go to the bank and make a credit loan, may raise money through loan, a credit contract. If the supplier needs money, they should go to the bank and do the same thing. We're talking about that we have this vendor finance structure, what's the reason? What's the reason? Look, it is not always that those guys here are able to go to the bank and raise money, mostly in Brazil. Why mostly in Brazil? Because this sector, banking sector, is quite concentrated. This is not new for me and neither for you. Brazilian banking is very, very concentrated, right? We have 80% of the banking in the hands of 4 banks: Banco do Brasil, Caixa Econômica Federal, Santander, Bradesco, Itaú, 5 banks, 80%. And we have plenty of firms, individuals, etc., that need money to move their business. So if we have a highly concentrated banking system, we put those guys here in a very good situation in terms of bargaining power. They can choose who's the one that will be financed by them. They can choose. So they will not finance everybody. They will finance just the guys that are safer to be financed, or the guys that are not that safe but have a reasonable revenue. Okay, so this is the situation. So I know that all of those guys here, they need credit, but if they go to the bank, they are small firms, they don't have audited financials, so they are family managed firms. So eventually they go to the banks and they don't get credit, or they get very expensive credit. Okay. This guy here is the opposite. Let's imagine that this guy here is the leading firm in this supply chain. So those guys are small, the customers are small, and this guy here is big, is huge. This guy here is huge. Okay. This guy has bankability. If this guy go to the bank, they can raise money easily. Okay. How this guy transfer bankability to these guys here? Through vendor finance. So vendor finance, at the end of the day, conceptually speaking, is the process of transference of bankability from this guy here to those guys here. Let's see how. Look, in the vendor finance, we have first bank and supplier making an agreement to finance supplier's customer. Guys, in this case here, when we have vendor finance in Brazil, we have always a leading company that is very strong. Generally, those guys here, the leading company that have the door open with the bank, they are firms that are in the corporate segment of the bank, in the global corporate, etc. They are firms with more than 400, 500 million reais revenue per year, at least, or they are multinationals. Okay, they are the firms that can go to the bank and request structured finance solutions. Hey, I don't want your shelf product. I want a structured finance solution to finance my customer. And those guys say, okay, I am here for you. Why? Because this guy is very important. It's a very important customer to the bank. Okay. All right. So first of all, the two of them, bank and supplier, discuss a portfolio finance agreement or vendor finance agreement. Supplier presents a list of customers to the bank. Supplier says, hey, bank, I have those guys here. They are my customers, traditional customers. okay? And I want these guys getting credit easily with you under the umbrella of our agreement. All right. Bank approves credit of each customer. So as soon as the bank receives the list of customers, bank will make the assessment of each customer and will approve or deny the credit profile. In some cases, a certain type of risk sharing might be requested. So eventually the risk, credit risk of this portfolio is bad or is not that good. And then the banks say to the supplier, to the leading firm, hey guys, I want to make this vendor finance agreement with you, but average credit risk of this portfolio is bad. So I need you to run part of the risk. It might be possible. We're going to discuss this further on, still in this class. But let's imagine in this example that those guys here make the assessment of the portfolio, like the credit as a whole, and say to the supplier, hey, credit is approved for these suppliers here. All right. As soon as we have the agreement up, then bank and customer establish a credit contract. So now those guys that didn't have access to the bank before, now they have, because they got indicated by the supplier. So they are able to make a credit agreement with the bank with, I will not say cheap interest rates, but more reasonable, eventually more reasonable interest rates or longer payment term. But this money is not to them to use as working capital the way they want. This money that they are raising here, the money that those guys are raising here, is basically to pay for the purchase that they are doing from the supplier. Okay, supplier makes a sell cash prompt payment instead of the supplier to finance those guys. Hey, I'll sell you and you pay me in 90 days, 120 days, 150 days. No, I will sell you cash. But I know that you don't have cash, so you can go to the bank, say that you are part of the agreement that I have with the bank, and then you can raise money to pay me cash at reasonable interest rate. Healthy for him, healthy for the supplier. Why this is healthy for supplier? Because they are not increasing their account receivable. They are selling at cash. They are selling against prompt payment. So they are receiving cash immediately after invoicing the product. So they are increasing their cash and they are not increasing their account receivables. For those guys here, it is also good, or it's better. It's better than if they go or if they went to the bank to raise money to pay the supplier cash, because they are getting a cheaper financing. So as this credit operation is, of course, completely tied to the agreement that the bank have with supplier, it's very common that the disbursement doesn't go to the customer. The disbursement related to the credit facility doesn't go to the customer. It's very common that the disbursement go directly to the supplier. in order to avoid those guys here to use the money for anything else, which is not to buy cash from the supplier. Okay? So, in this case here, I am considering that the bank is, as I said, making the disbursement directly to the supplier as soon as the supplier making the invoice the product. At maturity date, instead of customer pay the supplier, they will just settle the debt that he or she has with the bank, closing the operation. Vendor finance, or as I said, portfolio finance, which again is a transference of bankability from one side to the other, and in which this process help everybody in the supply chain. This guy will make, as I said, will be happy because he's gonna sell cash. Those guys here will be happy because they can buy cash from the supplier. Eventually, they can get the discount related to the cash price, and in addition, they raise money at a reasonable cost. And for those guys here, of course, they are very happy. They are very happy because although the risk of the portfolio is on them, they are making the disbursement to the supplier, and they know that the product is already shipped to the customer. So the customer will have the product that he needs to manufacture, to resell, and to get the profit necessary to pay back the bank in the maturity date. Okay. Same thing we have for compro finance. When the relations are the opposite, when the bargaining power is in the hand of the buyer instead of the supplier. Go ahead, Lucas, please.
I'm sorry, teacher, just one question about the other one, the vendor finance.
No problem.
So this risk which the supplier shares with the bank doesn't appear in any way in the balance sheet. Like, for example, the default risk that the customers may have upon the bank, that doesn't appear in any way in the balance sheet.
It may appear, Lucas. We're gonna discuss these 2 slides ahead, but it may appear depending on the percentage of the risk that the supplier is taking. Okay. It depends on the level of the risk. If it's a very small level, I will explain this better. But if this is a very small percentage of the risk, eventually it may be off balance sheet. We say off balance sheet. So we're not gonna have a appointment here in the liabilities.
Because
okay.
it seems like a company may hide the risk at some operations if she shares a lot of risk from this kind of operation.
Yeah, this is the objective at the end of the day. The main objective of a supplier like this is, first, the top one objective is to have a portfolio finance with the bank, in which the bank takes 100% of the risk of the portfolio, because this is 100% off balance sheet. If the bank says, hey, I am comfortable with the risk of the portfolio, so I will take 100% of the risk of this portfolio, for this guy, this is amazing because there is no issue related to his balance sheet. Mm-hmm. He's gonna simply sell cash, get cash, and nothing will appear in the liabilities. Okay, but as you well mentioned, it's not uncommon that those guys here say, hey, I like this portfolio, but I would like you to run a piece of the risk. So when they say, I want you to run a piece of the risk, then we need to see what's the percentage of the risk and how this risk will be distributed to see if it's going to appear in the liabilities or not. Ultimately, guys, when the one that decides if this type of operation will appear in the balance sheet is the auditing company, KPMG, Deloitte, Pricewaterhouse, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, that makes
Okay.
sense. Okay, thanks.
There is another one other alternative for the banks when they are not very comfortable with the risk of the portfolio. So instead of requesting risk sharing or first loss from the supplier, those guys here, how the bank defend itself against the risk. There are two options actually, basically. Or they increase collaterals, like requesting a percentage of the risk from the supplier, or they increase revenue. If the revenue is high, eventually the risk may be acceptable. So one alternative very common is that these guys here say, hey, supplier, the risk of the portfolio is not good for me. I feel that portfolio is okay, but there is a implicit risk that I am not comfortable with. So to me, to take these risks 100% on my balance sheet without sharing anything with you, I need you to pay me a structuring fee, the famous fees. So let's make the following. Let's make an agreement between me and you of 50 million reais to finance your customers. Okay, the customers will pay me the interest rate, no problem, but you will pay me 5% flat fee on the 50 million as a structuring fee. Structuring fee is nothing more than a way that the bank has to raise the profitability of this operation. For these guys here, eventually, no problem, because I mean, he will transfer into the price. He would give him the supplier would give the buyers a X% discount as they were buying cash, and now they will give a lower level of discount because they need to pay 5% to the bank. Okay, so there are several manners, several ways to structure this facility. Okay. Of course, the risk sharing or the first loss, we're going to see the difference between both of them. Having the supplier sharing the risk with the bank is the most common. Not uncommon to have supplier taking part of the risk to make the bank comfortable, plus structuring fee. Not uncommon at all. Very common, actually. Okay. All right. When we are talking about compro finance, we just change the sides. So the leading firm, the firm that bears the bargaining power, is at the buying side, while the suppliers are while the small firms with lower bankability are at the supplier side. So those guys here are the ones that have some or that face difficulties to access credit because they are small. What happens here? Same thing. Bank and leading firm sign a supplier financing agreement or compro finance. Okay. 2, supplier and buyer sign a supply contract with deferred payment. Look, those guys here, this guy here buys from those guys here paying at term. So you ship me the product and I'll pay you back in, I don't know, 120 days, 150 days, 1 year. So they set up a deferred payment contract, which is bad for them, right? They need to manufacture the product, incur in all costs and expenses related to this process, and they will get money back 120, 150 days after shipment. So those guys here know that this is difficult to the supplier. So they offer to the supplier, hey, if you need cash, you can make a loan directly with the bank. You just say that you are my supplier and you present to the bank the invoice of the product, not the fiscal of the product that you've shipped to me. Well, in the invoice, it's gonna be specified that I will pay you in 150 days. So you can make a loan using this invoice. You say to the bank, hey, I want to discount this invoice. I want you to pay me this invoice that has as maturity date 150 days ahead. I want the cash now. So the bank will simply make the cash payment at that moment to the supplier, of course, applying a discount rate. So if the invoice worth 150,000 reais, for example, to be paid in 150 days, bank will pay to the supplier, I don't know, 120,000 reais. The 30,000, the remaining 30,000 reais is the revenue that the bank will back you take from the buyer when they are supposed to pay for that invoice. So supplier presents the invoice to the bank make the payment in advance against presentation of the invoice. At invoice due date, instead of the buyer to make the payment to the supplier, they will make the payment full amount to the bank and will settle the credit operation between the bank and the supplier. Remark that here the risk for the bank is very small because they are getting 100% of the risk of the leading firm. So these guys here, they will make the credit operation just after they ship the product to the leading firm. So the risk of not receiving is exclusively from the leading firm, which is the buyer. So this is a more comfortable operation for them. So the risk structure in this type of operation is less necessary. Again, good for everybody. Good for this guy because they are making profit on small firms using the bankability of the big guys. Good for those guys here because they get cash payment. They need cash payment at a reasonable cost to pay their costs and expenses. And very good for those guys here because they are reducing their cash-to-cash lead time. They are receiving product from the supplier and paying for that just a X number of days after receiving the product. Okay. Well, when we talk on vendor finance and the risks involved in this structure, we need to understand the possible risk structure that we have. And we may basically, guys, set up 3 different types of risk structures. We may set up a full guarantee, a risk sharing, and a first loss. Let's talk about firstly on full guarantee. Full guarantee, as the name said, let's imagine that the bank and the supplier made an agreement of 100 million reais facility to finance the portfolio of customers of the supplier. 100 million reais, okay? Let's imagine this amount. When I say that the bank is requesting full guarantee from the supplier, means that all the operations done by the bank with the customers of the supplier shall be covered by the supplier. So if the customer doesn't pay, then supplier is fully responsible for each operation up to the total amount of 100 million reais, which is the total amount of the agreement between the bank and the supplier. Simple like that. Okay, simple like that. Then we have the variances, the differentiations of these more traditional guarantee. The first one is risk sharing. What does it mean, risk sharing, guys? Here we have a explanation, but what does it mean, risk sharing? What's the risk sharing structure between a bank and a supplier aiming to finance a portfolio? Please, Gabriel, go ahead.
Maybe it means that the big company isn't the sole responsible for everything. So on one hand, a bank may lose a little bit of money if there is someone who doesn't pay the money back. However, it will also share in the profits. Isn't that basically?
It's not exactly this way. Let me put some color on this. This is not a very trivial rationale. Go ahead, Mateus.
It's that they will share the risk of default if something goes wrong.
They share the risk of the
default, like of someone not paying.
But in which way this risk will be shared? That's the question.
Oh,
try it.
I don't.
Just try it. Anything.
I mean, there's a percentage maybe that if someone doesn't pay, then the company has to accept that she will lose as well.
Yeah, it's something in this sense. Look, when we talk about risk sharing, guys, let's say risk sharing in a portfolio of 100 million reais. Okay. Well, these 100 million reais will be distributed among several clients: customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, customer 4, customer N. So let's say that customer 1 took, I don't know, 1 million reais. Customer 2 took 2 million reais. 3 took 4 million reais. 4 took 5 million reais, and so on, until 100 million reais, client number N, number X. Okay. Let's say that the agreement between bank and leading company is the following. Hey, I want a 80-20% risk sharing structure. So in this case, bank will take 80% of the total risk of the portfolio, while the leading company will take 20%. Let's imagine, guys, that this guy here, client number 4, defaulted. He didn't pay. Well, if this guy didn't pay, bank will bear with 80% of the default, of the loss. So 80% of 5 million reais, 4 million reais. The leading company will take 20%. So the leading company will lose 1 million reais out of the 5 million of this customer. And it happens for each operation. If the customer Y that took 2 million reais default, again, 80% of the default goes to the bank, 20% of the default goes to leading company. So they share the risk of each operation within the portfolio of 100 million reais, as example here. What's the difference, guys, between, is that clear for you, risk sharing? Fine?
Yes, Professor.
What's the difference, guys, between risk sharing and first loss facility? What's the difference between these two types of structures? You can just try it, no problem. Go ahead, Mateus.
My hand is up. I didn't know, sorry.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't really have a clue.
No problem. Does anyone have a idea, a guess? First loss, guys, differentiates from risk sharing because of the following. Look, let's imagine again a portfolio of 100 million reais. Again, divided among any customers. So same thing. Customer 1 taking 1 million, 2 taking 2 million, 3 taking 4 million, and so on. Let's imagine that bank and leading firm, they have a 80%, again, 20% first loss agreement. In this case, guys, leading firm is taking 20% of, as the name says, of the first loss on 100 million reais. So 20% of 100 million reais is 20 million reais. Okay. All the losses, regardless the customer, all the losses up to 20 million reais are going directly to the leading company. So if the customer 1 defaulted, 100% of this default goes to leading firm. If the customer number 2 that took 2 million reais defaulted, the full amount goes to leading firm. Customer 3, 4 million reais, same thing, goes to 100% goes to the leading firm until the cap of 20 million reais.
And then after the cap, it's all to the
bank.
To the bank?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. As Mateus pointed out, as soon as we reach 20 million reais, all the defaults above 20 million reais go directly to the bank. So here we have the situation. First, well, banks are taking the biggest part of the portfolio risk. It's 80% against 20, right? But the leading company is taking 20% of the first losses. Here, the question is, what's the probability of a portfolio of 100 million reais in a certain sector have to have 20% default level? It depends. For agribusiness, I may say you, any portfolio in agribusiness, any portfolio has an average default level that varies from 3 to 5%. So if the leading firm is taking 20% first loss, this is very, very comfortable for the bank from a historical perspective. So the history says that the default level is 3 to 5 to 6%. The leading firm is taking 20%. The probability of 20% of a portfolio in agribusiness to default is basically unlikely to happen. Okay, so this structure of first loss, when we have a good first loss percentage, this structure of first loss appears to be safer to the financer, to the lender, against risk sharing, because in the risk sharing, each customer that default will generate a loss to both parties. Okay, first loss is very, very, very common for vendor finance and for securitization that we're gonna see in the next class. Okay.
And what's the most common in real estate?
In real estate, it depends. In real estate, Mateus, we don't have a lot compra and vendor finance. What we have in real estate is more securitization, or as well funds related to real estate. For securitization, when I mean securitization, I'm meaning CRI, Certificado de Recebíveis Imobiliários. The most common is first loss, but eventually we may have risk sharing. But the most common for securitization in general, including real estate, is first loss. For example, the builder of a certain building takes a percentage of the risk as first loss, and then we have the senior, the mezzanine quotas, taking the other risks. We're gonna discuss this better. We're gonna go back to the risk structure next class when we will discuss securitization. Okay, but most common is first loss always. Risk sharing actually is not that common in general, because again, there is a perception of risk which is much higher than the first loss. In the first loss, as soon as you have a history of the portfolio, credit history of the portfolio, and banks have these, you may set up a comfortable first loss level in which the bank may finance as it would be a full guarantee. Could I answer your question, Mateus?
Yes, Professor, thank you.
Any other question, comment, guys?
No, Professor.
All right. So if you guys don't have any other comment or questions, today I'll not make the check of presence. So I wish you guys a very, very good week and stay healthy. And we see you next Tuesday.
Bye, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you next week.
Bye,
Professor,
Professor.
can I ask you some questions after?
Of course.
One second.
Professor, are you not doing roll call today?
I'm sorry?
Are you not doing roll call today?
Sorry, Lucas, I couldn't understand.
It's not that important. Thank
No,
you.
não
No,
tem chamada não.
please, go ahead.
Are you not doing roll call?
The roll call.
A chamada.
The call. No, I didn't do the call today, the check. No.
Também achava que era outra língua que ele tava falando.
Sorry. No,
Cara, que isso?
for me, it's hard to
Tchau.
for nada.
Tipo, do nada, os caras estão falando japonês. Assim.
Pronto, professor. Posso falar em português?
Pode, do jeito que você quiser, cara.
Professora, porque, tipo assim, falando bem, a real é que eu ultimamente vi isso bem comum lá fora, onde as pessoas estão importando